In a bustling store, everything seemed normal until a white cop stopped a black woman, accusing her of theft in front of everyone. Little did he know she wasn't just anyone. She was a renowned doctor. What happens next will leave everyone questioning their biases and assumptions. The high-end store was buzzing with activity as customers browsed through the neatly arranged displays of designer items. Among them was Dr. Maya, a poised and confident black woman in her early 30s. Known in her community as a compassionate pediatrician, she had spent years building trust and relationships with families who relied on her care. Today, however, she wasn't in her scrubs or the familiar corridors of the hospital. She was here for something special, a birthday gift for her younger brother, Marcus. Walking through the store, Maya carefully inspected items, a small smile playing on her lips as she thought about Marcus's love for stylish gadgets. She picked up a sleek pair of headphones, examined the features, and placed them in her shopping basket. Her movements were deliberate and calm, radiating the same composure that made her patients feel at ease. Unbeknownst to Maya, a white police officer had entered the store moments earlier. Officer Blake, dressed in his crisp uniform, scanned the room out of habit, his eyes pausing on Maya. Something about her, the casual jeans, the simple jacket, or maybe just the color of her skin, caught his attention. Without a second thought, he began observing her closely. Maya moved to another aisle, still immersed in her thoughts. She didn't notice Blake's steady gaze or the subtle way he shadowed her steps. To him, her calm demeanor wasn't confidence, it was suspicious. His mind, shaped by years of stereotypes and assumptions, quickly jumped to conclusions. Why was she lingering? Why did she seem so cautious? As Maya reached for another item, she felt a slight prickle of unease, though she brushed it off. Little did she know, her quiet shopping trip was about to take a dramatic turn. Dr. Maya was examining a boxed smartwatch, debating whether Marcus would prefer its sleek design over the headphones already in her basket, when a shadow loomed beside her. She looked up, startled, to see a tall, uniformed white police officer standing uncomfortably close. His sharp blue eyes were fixed on her, his expression stern. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice cutting through the store's soft background music. "I need to speak with you." Maya blinked in confusion. "Yes? Is there something wrong?" The officer's gaze dropped briefly to the shopping basket in her hand before returning to her face. "We've had some reports of suspicious activity in this store recently. I need to check your bag." The words hung in the air, heavy with insinuation. Maya's grip on her shopping basket tightened as her pulse quickened. "My bag," she repeated, glancing down at the small crossbody purse slung across her shoulder. Her voice was steady, though a knot of unease began to form in her chest. "Yes," the officer said curtly. "It's a standard procedure when someone fits the description of a potential shoplifter." Maya's brows furrowed, her calm exterior beginning to crack. "Fits the description? What exactly is that supposed to mean?" "You're carrying multiple items," the officer said, gesturing vaguely toward her shopping basket, "and lingering in areas where thefts often occur." A few shoppers in the vicinity stopped to watch, their curiosity piqued. Maya noticed the subtle glances and the growing murmur of whispers. A woman in a corner aisle discreetly pulled out her phone, angling it toward the scene. "I'm shopping," Maya said, her tone measured but firm. "That's what people do in stores. If you're accusing me of something, I'd like to know exactly what." The officer straightened, his posture growing more rigid. "I'm not accusing you," he said, though the accusation was evident in his every word and gesture. "I just need to ensure everything's above board. Please open your bag." Maya inhaled deeply, willing herself to remain composed. Years of dealing with subtle and overt forms of racism had taught her the value of self-control. Still, the humiliation of being singled out in such a public manner stung deeply. "I don't think this is necessary," she said, meeting his gaze. I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm happy to pay for the items in my basket. The officer's jaw tightened. If you've done nothing wrong, then you shouldn't have a problem complying. Maya's discomfort was palpable now, and she felt the weight of every set of eyes on her. The whispers grew louder, punctuated by the occasional click of a camera shutter. Someone muttered, "What's going on?" While another said, "Looks like she got caught." "I have a problem," Maya said, her voice firmer this time, "with being treated like a criminal when I've done nothing wrong. I have a problem with being approached and accused for no reason other than your assumptions." The officer's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am," he said, his tone sharp and authoritative, "if you refuse to cooperate, I'll have no choice but to escalate this situation." Maya's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let her fear show. "Escalate?" she asked, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her throat. "Because I'm defending myself against unfounded accusations? I'd like to speak with the store manager." The officer ignored her request. "Your bag," he repeated, his hand hovering near his belt as if ready to pull out a set of handcuffs. Maya glanced at the growing crowd. Her instincts told her to comply, to avoid further humiliation, but her principles screamed otherwise. She couldn't let this moment pass without standing up for herself and for everyone who had been in her position. "Do you do this to everyone, or just to people who look like me?" she asked, her voice ringing out clearly. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the officer seemed momentarily taken aback, but he quickly recovered, doubling down. "I don't make the rules, ma'am. I just enforce them." "And I don't have to tolerate being treated unfairly," Maya countered. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly, and began recording. "If you're going to accuse me, you'd better have a good reason." The officer's expression darkened, but before he could respond, a store employee finally approached. "What's going on here?" the young manager asked nervously, glancing between Maya and the officer. "This woman is refusing to comply with a standard check," the officer explained, his voice clipped. The manager looked confused. "A standard check? We don't have any reports of theft today." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "She matches the profile of individuals we've had issues with in the past." The manager's eyes widened slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the implication. "Dr. Maya?" he asked suddenly, recognition dawning on his face. "She's a regular customer. She's a doctor." Maya looked at the manager, surprised and relieved that someone knew her. "Thank you," she said quietly. The manager turned to the officer, his tone more assertive now. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." But the damage was already done. Maya could feel the sting of humiliation, the weight of every judgmental glance and whispered comment. The officer muttered a half-hearted apology, but it was clear he didn't fully grasp the gravity of his actions. Maya met his gaze one final time. "You should think carefully about the assumptions you make," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "They affect real people, real lives." As she turned to leave, the crowd slowly dispersed, their murmurs fading into the background. Maya held her head high, but inside she felt a mix of anger, sadness, and exhaustion. This wasn't the first time she'd faced such bias, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. But this time, she had a platform, a voice that could spark change, and she intended to use it. As Dr. Maya walked away from the growing crowd in the store, her composure still intact but her heart racing, the incident stirred memories she had buried deep within herself. Each step she took seemed to unlock another door to the past, bringing forth the moments that had shaped her journey and the scars she carried. Maya's earliest memory of wanting to become a doctor was from when she was just 6 years old. She had been sitting on the porch with her grandmother, who struggled with diabetes. Little Maya had asked 1,000 questions about the syringes and pills her grandmother relied on. "Why can't I make you better, Grandma?" she had asked, her small hands clutching her grandmother's wrinkled fingers. "You can, sweetheart," her grandmother had said with a gentle smile. "But you'll have to work hard. People like us don't always get a fair chance." Maya hadn't fully understood those words back then, but they stayed with her. As she grew older, she saw what her grandmother meant, how people judged her family for their modest home, how teachers sometimes assumed she wasn't as capable as her peers. But those moments only fueled her determination. She poured herself into her studies, excelling in science and dreaming of the day she could wear a white coat and help others like her grandmother. Years later, Maya found herself in the hallowed halls of a prestigious medical school. She had thought the hardest part was getting accepted, but the real challenges began once she stepped inside. During her first anatomy class, Maya had eagerly raised her hand to answer a professor's question, her heart pounding with anticipation. The professor paused, looked at her with a raised eyebrow, and said, "Let's see if you've got it right." His tone wasn't encouraging. It was condescending, almost as if he expected her to fail. She had answered correctly, but the look on his face lingered in her mind for weeks. It was the first of many times she felt the need to prove herself in a space where she was often the only black student in the room. There was the time during her clinical rotations when a patient seeing her approach had demanded, "I want a real doctor, not a trainee." Maya had smiled through gritted teeth, politely introducing herself as the lead intern on the case, but the sting of those words followed her home that night. Her peers, too, weren't always kind. She recalled a study group session where a fellow student, frustrated with a complex case, had muttered, "Well, some of us don't have the luxury of affirmative action." Maya had felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her head down, determined not to let anyone see her hurt. She worked twice as hard as anyone else, spending long nights in the library and volunteering for extra shifts at the hospital. She knew she couldn't afford to falter, not when the world seemed to be watching, waiting for her to fail. Maya's flashbacks shifted to the moments when her hard work had paid off, when she had proven her doubters wrong. She remembered the first baby she delivered during her residency, a tiny, wrinkled boy with a strong cry. The mother, holding her newborn, had looked at Maya with tears in her eyes and said, "Thank you, doctor. You saved us." It was in those moments that Maya felt the weight of her struggles lift, if only temporarily. But even those triumphs were often overshadowed by the subtle and overt racism she continued to face. There was the hospital administrator, who once complimented her by saying, "You're so articulate, not like what I expected." Or the senior doctor who, after a disagreement during rounds, had quipped, "You must have a chip on your shoulder. No one's attacking you." Each comment, each instance of prejudice, left a mark on her. And yet, she refused to let them define her. Instead, she used them as fuel to push forward, to excel, to prove that her worth was not tied to the color of her skin, but to her skill and determination. As Maya's thoughts returned to the present, her eyes filled with unshed tears. The store confrontation had felt like a culmination of every battle she had fought before. The officer's assumptions, the crowd's stares, the whispered judgments, they were all echoes of the same biases she had faced her entire life. Her heart ached as she remembered her grandmother's words. "People like us don't always get a fair chance." But her grandmother had also said, "Never let that stop you." Maya took a deep breath, grounding herself in the knowledge of who she was and what she had overcome. She wasn't just a doctor. She was a survivor of a system that had tried, time and again, to hold her back. And while the world might see her as just another face in the crowd, she knew her value, and she wouldn't let anyone diminish it. Maya clenched her fists as she walked toward the exit of the store, each step a silent declaration of her resilience. The memories that had once weighed her down now felt like armor, a testament to her strength. The officer's actions had reminded her of how much work still needed to be done, how deeply ingrained racism was in society. But instead of feeling defeated, she felt a spark of determination reignite within her. She knew she couldn't erase the biases of the world overnight, but she could use her voice, her platform, and her story to make a difference. For every little girl who dreamed of becoming a doctor, for every young boy who was judged before he was understood, Maya would stand tall. As she left the store, the whispers and stares still trailing behind her, Maya silently vowed to turn this painful moment into something greater. She had faced discrimination before, and she had risen above it every time. This time would be no different. The tension in the store was palpable. The officer, standing stiffly in front of Dr. Maya, held her ID in his hand. The murmurs of the crowd had grown louder, with some people openly recording the scene on their phones. Others whispered among themselves, speculating about what Maya might have done to attract such attention. Officer Blake squinted at the ID, his eyes darting back and forth between the card and the composed woman standing before him. Her name was printed in bold letters, Dr. Maya Henderson. Below it, her professional title, Pediatrician, St. Joseph's Regional Hospital. The credentials were undeniable. Still, it took him a moment to process what he was seeing. His hand trembled slightly as he handed the ID back to her. "You're a doctor?" he asked, his voice noticeably softer, almost disbelieving. Maya met his gaze, her expression calm but unyielding. "Yes, I am. A pediatrician, to be exact. I've been practicing at St. Joseph's for 8 years. A ripple of astonishment passed through the crowd. A few people exchanged wide-eyed glances, while others stared at Officer Blake, waiting for his next move. The stark contrast between the cop's initial accusation and the truth of Maya's identity was becoming glaringly apparent to everyone in the room. Blake's face flushed with embarrassment as he struggled to find his words. I had no idea," he stammered. Well, there have been reports of theft in this area, and He stopped mid-sentence, realizing that no explanation would justify his actions. "I'm sorry," he said awkwardly. "This was a misunderstanding." Maya's calm demeanor didn't waver, but her tone grew sharper, her words cutting through the heavy silence. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated, her voice steady but charged with emotion. "This wasn't about theft. This was about an assumption you made the moment you saw me." Blake opened his mouth to respond, but Maya continued, her voice carrying the weight of years of silent frustration. "You didn't stop me because I was acting suspiciously. You stopped me because of the color of my skin. Let's not pretend otherwise." The officer shifted uncomfortably, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He glanced at the crowd, which had grown larger and more judgmental. Whispers of disapproval and condemnation swirled around him, and for the first time, he seemed to understand the gravity of his actions. "I'm truly sorry," he repeated, his voice quieter now. "It wasn't my intention to offend you." Maya raised an eyebrow, her gaze unwavering. "Your intention doesn't change the impact," she said firmly. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to be publicly humiliated for no reason other than someone's prejudice? To have your character questioned, your integrity doubted, simply because of how you look?" Blake had no answer. He lowered his head, his cheeks burning with shame. A woman in the crowd spoke up, her voice ringing out over the murmurs. "She's right, you know. You didn't question anyone else in this store. Just her." A man next to her nodded. "This happens all the time. People like him think they can get away with it. But not today." The comments came faster now, the crowd growing bolder as they expressed their disapproval. Some people called for the officer to be reported, while others praised Maya for standing her ground. The phones recording the incident captured every moment, ensuring that the story wouldn't end here. Maya held up a hand, signaling for silence. The crowd quieted, their attention fully on her. "I appreciate your support," she said, her voice carrying both strength and grace. "But this isn't just about me. This is about a system that allows these assumptions to exist in the first place. It's about the countless others who faced the same thing and didn't have the chance to speak up." Officer Blake looked up at Maya, his expression a mix of regret and realization. I didn't think," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I acted on instinct, and I see now how wrong I was. I'm truly sorry for what I've done." Maya studied him for a moment, her face unreadable. Finally, she said, "I hope you take this as a lesson, because an apology doesn't erase the damage. What matters is what you do moving forward, how you treat people, how you challenge your own biases. That's what real change looks like." Blake nodded, his eyes downcast. "I understand," he said quietly. "Thank you for calling me out." With the confrontation resolved, Maya straightened her shoulders and turned toward the store manager, who had been standing silently nearby, unsure of how to intervene. "I'll still be purchasing the items in my basket," Maya said, her voice polite but firm. "If that's all right with you." The manager nodded quickly. "Of course, Dr. Henderson. Please, allow me to personally handle your checkout." As she followed the manager to the counter, the crowd began to disperse, though many lingered, still processing what they had witnessed. Some people approached Maya to express their support, while others continued recording, ensuring the moment would be shared widely. By the time Maya left the store, the video of the incident had already begun spreading online. Within hours, the footage was trending on social media, sparking outrage and a larger conversation about racial bias and discrimination. In the days that followed, Maya received an outpouring of support from people around the world. Strangers sent messages thanking her for standing up against injustice, while others shared their own stories of facing prejudice. But for Maya, the incident wasn't just about going viral, it was about creating real, lasting change. She used the platform she had been given to speak out, delivering interviews and public talks about the harm caused by unconscious bias and the importance of challenging systemic racism. In one of her speeches, Maya addressed the incident directly, her words resonating with audiences everywhere. "What happened to me in that store wasn't unique," she said. "It's a reality that millions of people face every day. But moments like these give us a choice, to stay silent or to speak out. I choose to speak, not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever been judged unfairly." Her voice grew stronger as she concluded, "Change doesn't come from apologies, it comes from action. It starts when we confront our biases, when we choose to see the humanity in everyone, regardless of their appearance. And it starts with each of us. Right now." The audience erupted into applause, moved by her courage and determination. Maya smiled, her heart full of hope. Though the path ahead was still challenging, she knew she was ready to walk it, with her head held high and her purpose clear. The video of the incident spread like wildfire across social media. Within hours, hashtags like #Justice for Maya and #End Racial Bias were trending. The clip showed everything: the officer accusing Dr. Maya of theft, her calm but firm response, and the moment her identity as a renowned pediatrician was revealed. Millions of people shared the footage, accompanied by messages of outrage, solidarity, and calls for systemic change. The comments flooded in from every corner of the internet. Some shared their own stories of facing racial bias, while others expressed disbelief that such incidents still occurred in modern society. Maya's dignified handling of the situation inspired admiration and respect, with many calling her a role model for standing up against prejudice with grace. For Dr. Maya, the days following the incident were a whirlwind of emotions. She felt the sting of humiliation and the burden of the spotlight. But she also recognized the opportunity to turn her painful experience into a force for good. She had always believed in using her voice to make a difference, and now the world was listening. Invitations to speak on talk shows, podcasts, and community panels poured in. After much reflection, Maya decided to accept some of these offers, not for personal recognition, but to spark meaningful conversations about racism and the harm caused by assumptions. She prepared carefully, knowing that her words had the power to influence minds and inspire change. Standing on a stage in front of a packed audience for a televised event, Maya looked out at the sea of faces before her. The crowd was diverse, young and old, people of different races and backgrounds, all there to hear her story. She began by recounting the incident in the store, describing the hurt and frustration she had felt. "When that officer approached me, it wasn't just me standing there," she said. "I carried with me the weight of every person who has ever been judged unfairly, every child who's been told they can't dream big because of their skin color, every individual who's been made to feel less than." Her voice wavered slightly, but she pressed on. "The assumptions made about me in that store weren't new. They were built on centuries of stereotypes, on a system that teaches us to fear and mistrust what is different. And that's the real issue. It's not just one officer, one store, or one incident. It's a mindset that affects millions of lives every single day." Maya paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. Then she shifted her tone, infusing it with hope and determination. "But we have the power to change that. It starts with challenging our own biases, questioning the stories we've been told about people who don't look like us, and choosing to see the humanity in everyone. Real change begins when we challenge our assumptions and treat everyone with respect." The audience erupted into applause, but Maya wasn't finished. "This isn't just about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about coming together to build a world where no one has to prove their worth, where everyone is treated with dignity, and where we teach our children that the content of their character matters more than the color of their skin." Maya's speech resonated far beyond the auditorium. Clips of her powerful message were shared widely, sparking discussions in classrooms, workplaces, and community centers. People who had never considered their own biases began to reflect, while others felt empowered to share their stories and advocate for change. Schools began incorporating lessons on unconscious bias into their curriculums, while organizations reached out to Maya to develop workshops on diversity and inclusion. Her experience became a catalyst for broader conversations about racism, inequality, and the steps needed to create a more just society. Though Maya was grateful for the impact her story had made, she couldn't forget the pain of the original incident. She often thought about the officer, wondering if he had truly learned from the experience. She hoped he had, because change wasn't just about raising awareness, it was about transforming attitudes and actions. One evening, as she sat in her living room with her younger brother Marcus, he turned to her with a serious expression. "I saw your speech," he said. "You're amazing, you know that? You've always been my hero." Maya smiled, her eyes misting over. "I just want to make the world better for you," she said softly, "and for every kid who dreams of doing something great." Marcus nodded. "You already have." The incident that had begun as an act of prejudice became a story of resilience, courage, and change. Maya's journey reminded people of the importance of standing up for what's right, even in the face of injustice. Her words, simple yet profound, became a rallying cry for those fighting against racism and inequality. Real change begins when we challenge our assumptions and treat everyone with respect. And while the road ahead was still long, Maya knew that every step forward brought the world closer to the equality and understanding she had always believed in.